Hi there, Social Studies 30-1 here. Your next big assignment, your next major assignment is actually another and your last position paper for the year. So if you'll recall back in April, I assigned the economics position paper, marked it, put it on Power School. Today I'm going to talk you through and officially assign your next position paper. In this case, we're going to do a political position paper. So there you go. There is your source. Take a look at it. I'll give you a few seconds to mull it over, then I'll talk to you about it a bit. So just let that percolate, and let's take a quick look again at the overview. So you know this, you've seen this before. I talked you through this for the last one that I assigned on April 7th, way back when. But here's what needs to go into a position paper. Again, 5 paragraphs minimum. You can have more, that is fine, but you have to have at least 5 paragraphs. Paragraph 1, of course, is your introduction. You'll interpret the source basically, and a position paper source is never as detailed as the sources we do typically every day. These sources are really straightforward, so you're going to interpret, expand on the source, uncover the perspective that the source is advocating, talk about the dilemma, the challenge raised by the source, explore the different points of view. So why would someone completely embrace that source? Why would someone question and maybe disagree with that source? Talk about the values behind each point of view. And it's good if you can cite the theorists when you do this. And so the theorists politically would be Hobbes, who would advocate a dictatorship, and Locke, who would advocate a democracy. Remember, you want to be objective in the intro, and toward the end of the intro, you will establish your thesis. Keep it simple, keep it clear, keep it directed and concise, and briefly overview your 3 dominant arguments. And that's what goes in the intro. Again, this should all be review for you. And then body paragraph number 1 is part of the body. And, as you already know, you're beginning with a topic sentence that's just going to lay out what you're going to argue in this paragraph. And each topic sentence argument has to be supported by at least 2, although 3 examples would be better. Remember that you want to explain each of the examples in relation to your topic sentence, in relation to your thesis, at least once a paragraph you want to directly quote part of the source. And so that quoting can go in the topic sentence. It can go, as part of the explanation for your examples. You might want to quote your source or part of the source again in the clincher. I'll leave that up to you. But argument 1, argument 2, same blueprint, and argument 3, same blueprint. And so with each of the 3 body arguments and your intro, you should now be at 4 paragraphs. And you're going to finish with your conclusion, which is your 5th and final paragraph. You just revisit your thesis, kind of review your 3 predominant arguments, and you should be pretty good to go with your conclusion. And so with that, you have the structure for the 5-paragraph position paper. Your thesis, of course, is your position on the position paper. You may want to review the tutorial I gave back on April 7th when I officially assigned the economics position paper. Now be careful, that was for a different source. That was for an economic source. Today's source is political, but the instructions are much the same. You're pretty much going about it the same way. You're just interpreting a different source and you're bringing different content and evidence to the table because this one is now political. So there again, there you go. That is the source. The strength of a country is best achieved through its citizens. A country dominated by a powerful leadership is destined for failure. So what you're going to want to do when you interpret the source is maybe talk about what is the strength of a country? Like what could that mean? Uh, what does it mean that is achieved through its citizens? When I see that term citizen, I'm thinking democracy. A country that achieves its greatness, its strength through its citizens. is likely a democracy. And that would mean things like citizenship. You have guaranteed rights and freedoms. It would talk about the democratic process, elections, uh, citizens holding governments accountable through free speech, freedom of the press, and so on. You'd want to talk about citizens. What does that term really mean? What does it mean to be a citizen? And so, of a lot of things that I was just mentioning, you could talk about and bring to the table. And then conversely, it goes on to say a country dominated by a powerful leadership. Now we're getting something different. A powerful leadership to me means dictatorship, an authoritarian government. So that could mean Putin, that could mean Adolf Hitler, that could mean Stalin, any of the dictatorships we looked at from history, or even now, North Korea is a dictatorship. You could use as evidence for that part of the source. And then finally, it ends with, these governments, these countries are destined for failure. So a country dominated by a dictatorship is destined for failure. So things you'd have to expand on. What does it mean to be a citizen? Citizens are a sign of democracy. What does democracy give you? What is a powerful leadership? What does that mean? Well, it's a dictatorship. What does dictatorship bring you? And finally, failure. What does it mean when a country fails, when a state fails? It could mean that it's no longer a country or a state. It could mean it's like Germany at the end of 1945. The Nazis lost, Hitler killed himself. That dictatorship was over. That country was over. It was split in two, and that was the end of Germany as we knew it from 1945 and on. That could be what the source means by failure. But failure could also mean something more simple. It could just mean when a country fails, it serves to protect and enhance the quality of life of its citizens. So, how does North Korea fail as a country? Is it really serving its population? Is it really serving its citizens? To what degree does Putin's Russia, could we call that a failure today? In some ways, yes, it's successful, but in a lot of ways, it's not. It doesn't allow for political opposition. It doesn't give people a good political quality of life, etc. You'd want to expand on what it means to fail as a nation. It doesn't have to mean the country goes extinct and is defeated. It does not need to mean that. But that's the source we're going to work with for this position paper. By the way, this paper is due next Tuesday, May 26th. So I'm giving you all a week to work on it. The weather looks crappy out. This is a good week to be working on a position paper. It's one of the last chances you're going to get to raise your mark from the mark that you had as of March 15th. So if you want to, do well, do better in social, this is a really good way to do that. You've got a whole week to work on this. And again, you'll write these kind of papers in university college as well, even if you're not going to major in something like history. While we're talking about this, let's take a look at the spectrum. So you were working on your own, and I did say that I would share mine. Not that mine's better, but just, here's what I had in mind when I thought about all of these things, when I thought about all we've learned in democracy. Here's what I see in my head. So on one side of the spectrum that is democracy, we've got good things. Democracies hold their governments accountable, and there's various ways we can make governments accountable. Vote of non-confidence, the American checks and balances, and so on. Democracies guarantee rights and freedoms. They guarantee it through the Bill of Rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, all kinds of ways that we can guarantee rights and freedoms in democracy. Don't worry about this right now. That's something that you learn more later on. You don't really need that for this paper, so you might want to leave that well enough alone. Although the civil rights movement would be good. That's something that you could bring to the table on this paper that would be very effective in terms of evidence. These things we just haven't got to yet because of the abbreviated schedule. Democracy allows you the freedom of dissent. That means the freedom to speak out against your government and even criticize your government. And these are examples we'll look at of dissent in democracy. We just haven't got to them yet, but you do know enough. You know all there is to know now about the American Civil Rights Movement. That is an example of dissent. Moving on, separation of powers is how democracy ensures accountability. We've talked about lobby groups. And then we move to the dark side of democracy, which is, of course, corruption, anti-terrorist legislation, and things that are illiberal in nature, internment, eugenics, enabling act, and so on, are all signs of illiberalism in democracy. So you have enough to write on. Um, One other thing you might add to this, I was thinking even as well, maybe just political opposition, maybe just allowing for a political opposition in government helps to ensure accountability. So that is kind of the evidence that you're going to pick and choose from for this next position paper. Let's go back to it. There it is there. So the strength of a country is achieved through its citizens. Clear advocation of democracy. So he's probably talking about this side of the spectrum. You know, a strong country uses its citizens to make the country strong. And by that we would mean, voting, a political opposition, any form of dissent where you complain and express your disagreement with the government could be used as citizens taking action to make their country strong. Going back to the source, he talks about a powerful leadership is destined for failure. Well, that's now moving to this side of the spectrum. I was also thinking too, it might be worth taking another look at your authoritarian government spectrum that you did a while back now. That is also evidence that you can pick and choose from for your position paper. So there is what we studied in terms of the authoritarian government spectrum. And if we go back to the paper, the blue and the green is talking about dictatorships. A powerful leadership is destined for failure. A dictatorship will fail. So with that in mind, go back to your authoritarian government spectrum and pick and choose evidence that might prove that point if that's what you're going to argue in favor of. So if I'm writing this paper, I'm probably going to agree with that source. History has shown that, usually dictatorships end up in failure. I might say, and I need to be objective. So in the intro, I might talk about some of the good things that can come from dictatorships. Maybe Castro's cradle to grave welfare for Cuba, maybe the economic miracle of the 5-year plans in the former Soviet Union. So in the intro, I will establish there are some good things that went with authoritarian governments, dictatorships. But by and large, they all ended in failure, not necessarily because the country came to an end, although some of them did, but rather those countries didn't serve their citizens. They didn't do what was best for the majority of their population. So mass executions prove that, from that angle, powerful leaderships are destined to fail. They serve the self-interest of the powerful leadership, but not the population in general. And certainly by looking at mass executions, you could use that to prove that point. You could use indoctrination to prove that point. Um, Powerful leaderships fail because they have to resort to propaganda indoctrination to trick people into going along with them. I don't call that success because you're hiding the truth from people. For sure, you could probably go after, and this is probably where the bulk of my writing would come from. If I was to defend the blue and the green part of the source, I'm going after the suppression of rights and freedoms because every dictatorship suppresses rights and freedoms. And to me, that is a failure of the powerful leadership. They're taking away things that we might take for granted. They're taking away rule of law. They're taking away free speech. They're taking away mobility rights and so on. You're suppressing what people are supposed to have. And these are good examples and pieces of evidence of that suppression. I'd probably build a whole argument out of the suppression of rights and freedoms that we find in dictatorships, because to me, that's one of the things that makes them fail. To me, the mass executions are one of the things that make these systems fail. And so if I was writing a paper on that, I might have one argument on mass executions. I might have one argument on suppression of rights and freedoms. I would probably want to pick an argument centered around the strength of democracy to prove the yellow part of the source is right. And I think that it is right. So if I'm trying to prove the yellow part, the strength of a country is achieved through its citizens, I'd go to my democracy spectrum and I'd probably pick from stuff over here. Citizens need to make these things happen. They need to hold their leadership accountable by being aware, by lobbying for what they want from their government, for voting whenever they're supposed to vote, for being politically aware, for not being politically apathetic. Um, to me, these are the strengths of democracy on the screen. And a lot of these, it's up to the citizen to make them happen. So elections are up to the citizens. Independent media is up to the citizens. They need to speak out against their government and hold them accountable. Anyone can form a political party and support it that is coming from the citizens. So that's what I mean by citizens, or what this guy I think means by citizens making their country strong, making it powerful. People are politically active, they're politically aware, they make their country strong, as opposed to the authoritarian regime. I can't think of much else to tell you. Evidence is coming from the democracy spectrum. You're getting it from your authoritarian government spectrum. I think we've pretty much done all we can do in terms of highlighting and expanding upon that source. Again, that's what goes into a position paper. There is your overview. I don't know what else we would talk about. There are your notes for authoritarian government. So when you go to draw evidence, and if you want to review your notes, you're going to go back to chapter 5, which was Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. You're going to use a lot of information from chapter 10, maybe a bit from chapter 11, which is illiberalism. And that's, you may decide that the source is wrong, and that in democracy, citizens don't make the country strong, and that is completely your call. I'll fully support that if you support your arguments with evidence. And so if you were going to attack this source, and if you're going to try and prove that democracy is not, a strong political system, you would be using the illiberalist side more than likely of your democracy spectrum. Maybe chuck in corruption too, but that is completely your call. You need to make a position, and defend your position for this position paper. I can't think of much else to tell you. We've done this before. I think you know what you need to do. It is due on Tuesday, May 26th. I think that's a Tuesday. Just let me check my calendar here and we confirm that up. Yep, Tuesday, May 26th, it's due. After that, we'll do one more source analysis, and that'll be the end of your chance really to earn marks and really improve your mark in Social Studies 30-1. One final thing, I'll put all of the stuff we just talked about in D2L under content. You will find it under the political position paper tutorial, the position paper source itself, democracy spectrum, the overview, and finally the rubric that we'll use to mark it, and you can use to build your essay as well. All of that will be in the position paper tutorial. The last one we did was assigned on April 7th if you wanted to review those instructions. And everything else, again, you would find under content, chapters 5, chapters 10, maybe chapter 11 if you wanted to attack that source, and that's up to you. Please email me if you're confused, if you're not sure. I'd be happy to help you with brainstorming and where you want to go with your paper. Please take it seriously. I know you will, and I look forward to marking it.